Tonight, we want to talk about China and Israel, and that's why I wore my Chinese tie in the spirit of talking about China. First time I ever wore it, and my wife said it's the last time you ever wear it.
Wait, the red tie or actually China?
It's like, Chinese pattern, red, red dragon. So we want to talk about China and Israel. To continue from last time, because last time we discussed the symbolism of the dragon, the snake, the horse. We said how in Bereshit, right at the beginning of Genesis, we're introduced to dragons, Taninim HaGdolim, the Leviathan, and then we're introduced to the Nachash, which is a snake. And then in Yaakov's prophecy, at the end of Genesis, on his deathbed, Jacob blesses his children, and then he gives a blessing to Dan, which is all about the end of days and Moshiach. And Yaakov says, I pray for your salvation, Liyishuatcha kiviti Hashem. And over there, he describes Moshiach, the salvation, as coming like a snake. Yehi dan nachash alai derech. And then he says that the snake will bite. Anoshech ikvei sus. He bites the horse's heel, and the horse falls back. That's how it's phrased. So there's this progression of dragon, snake, horse. That the snake bites the horse's heel and the horse falls back. And on the Chinese Zodiac, this year is the year of the dragon, next year is the year of the snake, and the following year is the year of the horse. So that's a very interesting parallel between Chinese symbolism, mythology, and what we have in the Torah. And we don't believe in coincidences. Everything happens for a reason. So we want to explore that. What's the connection between Israel and China? Something that we never really hear anything about. It seems like the two have nothing at all in common, like nothing to do with each other. You might think that the Torah says nothing about China, that it wasn't known to the Israelites back then. But actually there's a very deep connection between the two. So we basically want to continue from last time. We talked about the dragon and the snake last time, and then we want to focus on really the other 10 animals of the Chinese zodiac and see what they mean in Judaism, because these animals are actually deeply symbolic in Jewish literature as well, and having to do with the Messianic age as well. So we want to go through them. And just a quick recap, the Chinese zodiac is 12 animals. So there's a 12-year cycle, and it's based on this ancient Chinese legend of the Jade Emperor. And the Jade Emperor held a race, the Great Race, and he let these animals run across or race across a river. And whoever would cross the river first, in the order of which they crossed the river, in that order, the Jade Emperor would name the years, the yearly cycle. And so the ox went first, and the ox was, strong and powerful, and the river current didn't affect him, and the ox crossed, but the rat piggybacked on the ox, and the ox was really nice and friendly and let the rat on his back, so the ox carried the rat across. But just as they got to the finish line, the rat jumped off the ox's back and quickly ran across the finish line, so the rat came in first. So the rat tricked the ox, and the rat came in first. So the first year of the Chinese cycle is the year of the rat. And then the ox came next. So the ox came in second, even though the ox did all the work, but the ox came in second in this cycle. And then what came next? Who knows? So after the ox came the tiger. The tiger is also very strong. The tiger was able to cross. And then came the rabbit, who was able to get across by jumping on rocks. The nimble rabbit jumped across, and so the rabbit came in fourth. And then after the rabbit came the dragon. So the dragon really should have come in first, because the dragon could have just flown right across. But why did the dragon come in fifth? Because the dragon flew off. On the way, he got distracted by poor villagers who needed rain. They were running out of water, and the dragon in China is a positive symbol and a symbol of blessing and all that. And so he heard the Chinese praying, "V'ten talu matar livracha." So the dragon flew off to the side and went to bring rains to the poor villagers. Yeah, and then flew back and crossed the finish line 5th. And then, of course, is the snake came, but the way the snake came is actually also by piggybacking on the horse. The horse was going across, and the snake slithered up on its heel, like Yaakov was saying, Ikvei sus, the snake slithered up on the heel, and the snake slithered up on the heel of the horse, and just as the horse was about to get to the finish line, what did the snake do? The snake bit the horse, or startled the horse, and anoshech ikvei sus veipol rochvo achor, and the horse falls backwards, and so the snake crosses the finish line before the horse. So the snake is 6th, and then the horse comes in 7th. Okay, and then what happens after the horse? We have 3 that work together. The sheep was too weak to do it on its own, and the monkey was too weak to do it on its own, and the rooster, but they all put their brains together, and they helped each other. So the sheep and the monkey and the rooster worked together and crossed the finish line. And finally, you have the dog, who was busy playing games and was being foolish, and what all the things that the dogs kind of represent. And the dog came in 11th, and the very last was the pig. The last year of the Chinese Zodiac is the year of the pig, and the pig also came last because he got hungry and he got sidetracked. He went to eat, he went to roll in the mud, and not very serious, and came in. This is the legend. This is the legend of the Jade Emperor, going back to the beginning of the Chinese calendar, which I'll get to. Now, our initial position might be this has nothing to do with Judaism. Why are we doing this in a synagogue? This has nothing to do with anything. But this is where the Jewish calendar and the Chinese calendar come together. Because, the world generally uses the regular solar calendar of 365 days, right? We follow the sun, we follow the Earth's orbit around the sun, 365 days, 365 and a quarter days. Ancient societies typically used a lunar calendar. They just followed lunar months. But then the problem with that is, of course, that you lose synchronicity with the sun. If you only follow the moon, you're going to fall behind the sun. So a lunar year is only 354 days. So that, like we've mentioned before, like the Muslim calendar is still a strictly lunar calendar. And they're always falling behind 11 days a year. That's why Ramadan is always shifting. Ramadan can be in the winter, in the fall, in the summer, in the spring, because you're always going to fall behind the solar calendar. Now, we know the Torah is unique in that that God commands us. It's actually the first mitzvah, as we know. In Egypt, the first mitzvah that the Jews got before they even came out of Egypt was to make sure that Chodesh Nisan is the first month of the year. Rosh Chodesh Nisan is the first month of the year, and it has to be in the spring. That Nisan is Chodesh HaAviv. It's the month of spring, and Pesach is Chag HaAviv. So Pesach always has to be in the spring. Passover is a spring holiday, and Nisan always has to be at the start of spring. So on the one hand, we're told that we have to keep lunar months, but on the other hand, God commands that you also have to make sure that the month of Nisan is always in the spring. And so the only way to do that is that every 2 or 3 years, you have to add an additional 13th month. So because you fall behind. You fall behind 11 days every year. So every 2 or 3 years, you have to add an additional month, like we did this year. This year, we have 13 months. We add another Adar to make sure that Pesach is in the spring and that Nisan begins at the start of spring.
So it's not the same pattern, 2 or 3?
It's 7 times in 19 years. So we add an additional month 7 times in 19 years. So every 19 years, the cycle repeats. And that way, you ensure that you have the moon and the sun together. So our calendar is luni-solar. It's lunar months, but we still sync up to solar years over 19 years. And that ensures that the holidays are always in the right time. And that's our special calendar. And that we consider this calendar to be something really divine and something holy and something that God commanded us to do. Right? And we build our whole lives around this calendar. The Jewish life is built entirely around the calendar. And that's one of the most amazing things about Judaism, and one of the most positive things about it, is that on the Jewish calendar, every day is meaningful. Every month is meaningful. Every week is meaningful. We're always looking forward to the next. We're full of holidays, right? We have Pesach now. Everybody's getting ready. We have Purim now. Everybody's getting ready for Purim. As soon as that ends, now is the race to get prepared for Pesach. As soon as that's over, it's 50 days of Sfirat HaOmer, and you have Lag BaOmer, and you have all these other things happening, Pesach Sheni, and then it's Shavuot, and then after Shavuot, you're already looking forward to the next thing, and you have Yud Zayin Tammuz, and you have the 3 weeks, and you have Tisha B'Av, and then Tu B'Av, and then it's already Rosh Chodesh Elul, and everybody's planning for the high holidays, and then it's Rosh Hashanah, and Kippur, and Sukkot, and just as you're taking down your Sukkah, it's already, Chanukah. It's like it never ends. A week after Chanukah is Asara B'Tevet, and a month after that it's Tu B'Shvat, and now it's Purim again. So it's like you're always within a month of a holiday, basically, or some other, and there we have so many significant days. The 40 days of repentance are significant, and the 50 days of Sfirat HaOmer, and the 3 weeks, and Shovavim, and we have like so many periods where every day is meaningful and symbolic, which is something really amazing. We build our whole life, our entire lives are built around the calendar, right? So the Jewish calendar is something really special and holy to us, and we think of it as something absolutely unique. Nobody else does this, right? Other cultures either follow a lunar calendar or a solar calendar, right? Wrong. Guess who else follows a lunisolar calendar? The Chinese, right? The Chinese calendar is the same calendar. The Chinese have lunar months, but they stay synchronized to the solar years, and that's why Chinese New Year is always at the end of January, beginning of February. Just like our holidays, it's not always the same day, but it's always around that same time, because just like we say that our New Year, Rosh Chodesh Nisan, which is the Jewish New Year. Remember, Rosh Hashanah we consider it to be the global New Year, the New Year for all of creation, the New Year for Adam, for Bnei Adam. And the Masechet Rosh Hashanah, the Mishnah says that we have 4 New Years. The Jewish New Year is actually Rosh Chodesh Nisan. That's the New Year for the Jewish people. So just like for our New Year in Rosh Chodesh Nisan, we make sure that it's always in the spring. Chinese New Year is the same. They intercalate and add an extra 13th month to make sure that Chinese New Year is right before spring, to make sure that it coincides with as we get ready for spring. It's a bit earlier, it's more like end of winter, but the idea is that Chinese New Year always has to be before spring. And so they always keep it at that place. And guess how many times they intercalate? How many extra months do they? 7 times over 19 years. It's literally the same calendar. Right? Just shifted maybe a month back because the Chinese New Year is a bit before Pesach. But actually there's a connection there too, because we say, when do we say is the start of the agricultural season? When do we start the irrigation and start preparing for the new crop? Tu B'Shvat, right? Tu B'Shvat is the start of the new irrigation season. That's why the mazal of Shvat is Aquarius. Aquarius is Deli. Aquarius means to give water, to irrigate. So the irrigation season begins on Tu B'Shvat, on the Jewish calendar as well. And Chinese New Year is typically right around Tu B'Shvat. So actually even there, we agree on that it's really the start of the new agricultural season. So it's basically the exact same calendar, right? Same thing. And so there is a very deep connection there, because that's not a coincidence, right? Why is it that God brought about our cultures in such a way that Dafka, Israel, and China make a big deal about this calendar, right? And build our lives around this special lunisolar calendar with 7 extra months over 19 years? That can't be a coincidence. And we've already seen some parallels before, the symbolic parallels of the dragon and the snake and the horse and that progression. And we see that on the Chinese Zodiac. So sure, we don't accept their Jade Emperor mythology and some of the idolatrous pagan elements of whatever Chinese traditional beliefs. But clearly there are some amazing parallels there. So there's some kind of common spiritual origin. And that's really what we want to explore. And as we'll see, all the animals on the Zodiac are actually deeply significant in Judaism as well.
Zodiac or
in their Zodiac. In their 12 animals of the Chinese Zodiac are also very deeply significant for us.
You're saying that those 12 animals are also corresponding to the...
There's a 12-year cycle and there's the 19-year cycle of adding a month. So they don't exactly parallel.
The Zodiac for us is represented by a month.
Right. No, these are a yearly zodiac. I'm not talking about the monthly zodiac of the mazalot that we know. I'm going to talk about the Chinese zodiac of years.
So there actually, there's a body and outer space that
No, these are not based on constellations. The Chinese zodiac is not based on the Western style astrological constellations. It's not related to that. So there is all this in common, and I have to say that when we say Chinese calendar, but as we're going to go through the sources as well, we have to remember that we're not just talking about China, we're talking about really the whole Far East. Because when our sages talk about China, we talk about Sin, they don't mean like China as we know it today. They mean the entire Far East. They mean Japan, they mean Korea, they mean all of that. Vietnam, all of the Far East, right? The entire like east coast of Asia and the islands. And actually, that whole region uses the same calendar, technically. They have slight variations of it, like the Vietnamese calendar is a little different. There are the Mongolian one, slightly different. And I'll talk about those differences. There's a slight change in the animals. So like instead of a rabbit, you have a cat, or instead of a pig, you might have an elephant, and we'll get to that. But so just as a disclaimer that when we say China, we don't specifically necessarily mean the Communist Party of China. We mean all of the Far East. Okay, we're just using the word Sin because that's how that region was referred to in ancient times. So if we actually meditate on this for a minute and think about Israel and China, you have the furthest west of Asia. Israel's on the west coast of Asia, on the Mediterranean, and then China is on the east coast of Asia, right, on the Pacific. They're like on opposite poles of Asia. And yet, we actually have a lot in common. Think about it culturally, socially, religiously. Both of our cultures, first of all, are very spiritual and mystical. And China is known for its spiritual religions, Confucius and Tao, and all kinds of different things. And Buddhism, although Buddhism didn't emerge in China specifically, but it was popular in China and in the Far East, Zen Buddhism and all that. And you think about Shinto in Japan and various other spiritual, mystical movements. Actually, if you read like Confucius, sometimes it seems like reading the Talmud. It's like this person said this, but this person said this. It almost sounds like, it feels like reading a Gemara. Like Amar Rabbi this, and Amar Rabbi that, and Tanya Rabbi, like that. It sometimes reads the same way when you look at the teachings of Confucius, where this sage said this and this sage said that. So we have that in common, the spirituality, that the mystical elements, the respect for sages, the respect for parents, right? Honoring parents for us is huge. And it's one of the 10 commandments, right? It's so important that it's in the 10 commandments. It's like, don't kill people, don't commit adultery, don't steal, honor your parents. Like, really? Are those really this, like, it's that important, right? Like, we have like honoring parents in the same place as not killing people. So for us, honoring parents is super important. And in the Far East, it's super important, right? The idea of honoring parents, there's even ancestor worship. And, to this day, in China and in other places, it's like you take care of your parents until the last breath, right? Like they live with you and everything, right? So there's the honoring parents aspect of it and the honoring of sages. Similar parenting styles, too, going the other way. Not just honoring parents, but similar in the way that parents treat their children. This whole pushing them to never giving them any space, being that tiger mom style. That's true for Judaism too, right? Like the Jewish mom and the Chinese tiger mom have a lot in common. Maybe the Jewish moms are more soft and affectionate. I don't know if I can say that. But I think that's stereotypically true, that Jewish moms are known to be more affectionate and smothering in a positive way, not in a suffocating way. But maybe both. So, but you have the same idea of parents being very involved with their children and having really high expectations of their children and putting a lot of guilt on their children. So that's true as well in terms of the parenting styles are similar.
Higher education probably.
The focus on higher education, pushing the kids to be the best they could be, to study, to succeed. And that's why you see in the Western world, Jews and Chinese people tend to dominate, also Indians, but Jews and Chinese people tend to dominate, like in the professional world and business and careers. They tend to earn more, they tend to succeed and move up, because they work hard. That's the reality. A lot of people see conspiracy theories, It has nothing to do with conspiracy, it's just a work ethic. So you have Jews that have a really strong work and study ethic, and same thing with Chinese, Japanese, Korean, it's the same. So we have that in common as well. It's interesting, since we're already talking about conspiracy theories, people love the Jewish conspiracy theories, right? Everybody is like into Jews control the world, Jews run all the banks. The funny thing is that Jews don't actually run all the banks. They don't run that many banks anymore. And if you look up today, the top 10 banks in the world, the top 10 biggest banks in the world, 4 of them are Chinese. So but nobody talks about the Chinese bankers that rule the world, even though China dominates finance. Like China has so much influence on the financial markets. But I don't know, the conspiracy theorists just like to pick on Jews for some reason. But China's just as prominent, in fact, more prominent in finance than Jews are. So we have a lot of these things in common. With Israel as well, it's interesting that China is like, on the one hand, investing heavily in Israel and buying up a lot of things and buying, I don't know if you heard about buying the port of Haifa. They bought Tnuva. They invested $130 million in Technion in Haifa. So they're putting tons of money in Israel. On the other hand, like the Communist Party is vocally very anti-Israel. And like together with that whole Russia, Iran, the BRICS countries, Russia, Iran, that alliance with the Arab world against Israel. And since October 7 too, there's been a lot of anti-Semitism in China. So it's strange. China has this like love-hate relationship with Israel. So on the one hand, you see in China a lot of Chinese want to emulate Jews. And there's a lot of books in China written about Jews and how you can be like the Jews. On the other hand, there's like this resentment and hatred. I once tutored, I used to tutor like biology, chemistry, sciences for like high school and university students. So I had many students who were Chinese. And there was one who was like fresh from China, like didn't speak English so well. He was one of those that the parents sent him here and like they were there, but they bought him a house here so that he could come and he was learning and they were still back home. So I was tutoring him, and then one time I come, and like he knows I'm Jewish, obviously, or the kippah and everything. So one time I come and I see like a book with like a Magen David on it, and some like Chinese characters, and I'm like, oh, for sure this is one of those like Chinese conspiracy books that Jews run the world. And so I started asking him about it. He's like, oh yeah, this is a great book. It's about Jews, and like I want to learn more about Jews. I'm like, like that stuff's not really true. It's just conspiracy theories, right? That Jews run the world. He's like, no, that's great. We want to run the world too. That's why we have all these books. We want to learn. We want to learn how to run the world. I said, yeah, I wish. Anyway, so there is this strange love-hate relationship. But we have a lot in common in terms of socially, culturally, the hospitality aspect, the getting together on holidays, the family ties. So we have a lot in common. So why is that the case? And in addition to the calendar, and there's one more thing that's really mind-blowing if you think about it. How do we say China in Hebrew? Sin. This is not a modern Hebrew term. This is how our sages referred to China, as we shall see from the beginning. Now, why is that bizarre? That Far East, for some reason, our sages refer to the Far East as Sin. Why is that bizarre? Yeah, because in the Torah, sometimes with the samech, sometimes with the tzad. But there's no difference, because where do we see that word first? In the Torah, where do we see that same term? Where, like we see it in many places. Where did we get the Torah? Yeah, Har Sinai, Bamidbar Sin. The Torah mentions Midbar Sin. And interestingly, in the Torah as well, it's sometimes spelled Midbar Sin with a samech, and sometimes Midbar Tzin with a tzadi. And there's a rabbinic question, is that the same place or a different place? Because if we mentioned this a few times, the way to properly pronounce the tzadi, it's not a tza sound, it's a sa, right? Like the proper Sephardi, Mizrahi way of pronouncing it is sa. Really, sin and tzin, it doesn't matter. It would have been pronounced with a sa sound anyways in ancient times. And tzadi is really a sadi.
Yeah, but the different letters usually mean different things.
Right, so there is a debate. When the Torah mentions midbar sin and midbar tzin, is that the same place or a different place? That's subject to debate. But regardless, we know that we got the Torah on Har Sinai, b'midbar sin. Why would our sages use the term for where we got the Torah, Sin, which is clearly somewhere around Israel, right, with the Far East? Isn't that weird? What's the connection? Why, where did that come from? How did Sin, where we got the Torah, become Sin of the Chinese and the Japanese and the East Asians? How did that happen?
Sorry, can you...
So we always refer to the Far East as Sin. Okay? But in the Torah, that word, when it first appears, is a place close to Israel, like somewhere between Egypt and Israel, where we got the Torah, Midbar Sin, like Har Sinai, right? Like Mount Sinai. So the Torah mentions Midbar Sin, Midbar Tzin, and Midbar Sinai, but some say that it's all the same place. But then at some point, Sin becomes associated with East Asia. How did that happen? The first place where Sin is mentioned is, like you said, with Noach. Okay, within the table, what's called the Table of Nations. Because what happened after Noach? After the Great Flood, Noach had 3 sons, and then they had a bunch of kids and grandkids, and altogether there were 70 peoples. They divided up into 70 distinct peoples. And one of those people was named Sin. So Sin is one of these 70 nations. In the list of nations, it's one of the 70 nations. Actually, one of the sons of Canaan. So one of the sons of Canaan was Sin. So Sin was originally a place next to Israel. So when Noach got off the ark, he and his sons and his grandsons, they all populated the same place around that region, the Middle East. Bavel, Turkey, Egypt, Israel, right? They were relatively close, and they were all like one family. And one of those people, one of those clans was Sin. Now, what happened to those 70? Afterwards. Originally, they were all kind of close, all living next to each other. And then what happens? A few hundred years after the flood, there was this story of Migdal Bavel, that they all kind of unified. They all spoke the same language, the Torah said. Safa achat udvarim echadim. They were all united still. They were all like one big family, 70 clans. And they decided to build a tower. So we've discussed that before. We're not going to talk about the tower. But we know the punishment for the Tower of Babel, Migdal Bavel, was that there was this dispersion, right? God dispersed them all over the world. And that's when all the distinct nations, major nation groups were formed. That's how we went from one family, all speaking one language, all related, to being spread out all over the globe and splitting into 70 different languages, 70 different language families. So guess what happened to Sin? Right. So Sin was dispersed to China and to the Far East. So that's how the place Sin, which was originally around Israel, became the Far East. In the same way, that's what happened to Ashkenaz, right? We know Ashkenaz was originally near Turkey somewhere, and then Ashkenaz was spread to Europe, and Ashkenaz became Germany. So then that became another whole conspiracy theory, that the Ashkenazi Jews came from the Khazarian Turks, and all that nonsense. So there's no evidence for that at all. It's true that Ashkenaz was originally in Turkey, but then after the dispersion, Ashkenaz became Germany. So Ashkenaz just means Germany. That's it. And some people even connect it to European tribes like the Saxons, the Scandians, like Scandinavia. Some people say it actually goes back to Ashkenaz, the same root as, to Skenaz, Ashkenaz, same, sounds like Saxon. So that was Ashkenaz. Same thing with Sfarad. Even though Sfarad was not one of the 70 sons, the original Sfarad was not Spain. Sfarad is the city Sardis, Saparda, according to the Greeks and Persians, in Turkey, in Asia Minor also. And then that became associated with the far west to Spain, to the Iberian Peninsula. But Sfarad originally in the Tanakh is a local place. Same thing with Tzarfat. Right? We read about Eliyahu. Eliyahu went to Tzarfat. Does that mean he went to France? No, of course not. Tzarfat was a place in what is today Lebanon. And then later it became associated with France. So all these place names, local place names around Israel, became later associated with distant places. So Sin originally was where Har Sinai is, and then the Sini clan was dispersed to the Far East and became China. So either you go with an evolutionary approach and they adapted to their environment, or you say God made them all different. The Zohar says that the world is round and spins on its axis and people look different all over the world. Mishinuya de avira. That people look different all over the world because of the difference in the environment, in the atmosphere. So they adapt to their particular environments. So either you say that they just adapted over time to their particular environment, or you say that God wanted to be creative and change the colors on Photoshop. Switched everybody around. All right, so that's how we got to.
But this migration, are you connecting something that you've seen evident, like archaeologically, or is there evidence?
No, I don't think there is archaeological evidence for the dispersion idea, and I think that's deliberate. I think God covered it all up so that each of these cultures now has this like ancient tradition. Part of the dispersion meant that God had to give them all a new distinct culture. Meaning, yesterday they were all one family in Bavel. Today they've been spread all over the world. Like, think of, that must have been a miraculous thing, that they got dispersed all over across seas and oceans and whatever. And I believe that God basically completely changed them. Their name, we know their names changed. Right, like Nimrod became Amraphel, and so on. Shem became Melchizedek, and so everything changed about them. And I think God also had to program them with a whole new history and a whole new culture and tradition. And that's why every culture has similar myths, but like in their own names and with their own like spin on it. Like every culture has a flood myth, and every culture has all kinds of creation myths that are really similar. So there's a lot of similarities. And like we talked about the symbolism of the snake and the dragon and all that. Why is it that all cultures across the globe have the same mythical creatures representing a lot of the same ideas? Because they came from one place and then God dispersed them, and then they all had new names, new languages, new histories, new traditions. So I don't think you can find necessarily an archaeological link between them.
Just eventual migration.
No, I don't go with that. I know that that's one approach, that they just eventually didn't understand each other and spread out. I don't see that as practical.
Do you think the dispersion of Babel was a reset?
Yes,
Program of,
I believe it was a reset where they were mamash dispersed, like miraculously transported away. And not just like, oh, now we can't understand each other, so we're going to move away from each other. Like, to me, that seems a little too childish. And wouldn't explain how people got to the Americas. Like what, now they crossed the ocean? Like, you know what I mean? Like, how did they get...
Pangea thing.
No, it's too recent for that. Pangea was millions of years ago. That wouldn't, when the earth was all one landmass. Yeah, that wouldn't fit.
So you're putting the starting point with Babel, with the change of languages. So basically you're putting that as the starting point for all civilizations all over the world?
The way we have them today.
The way we have them now, yeah. As we know them now, yeah.
Meaning, like, for example...
It's over 4,000 years ago. So you're not going to find much historical, meaning recorded history. You're not going to find much recorded before about 4,500 years ago. Like in terms of written records, there's almost nothing before 4,000 years ago. So that actually fits with this. We have no written records of it. We'll find things, we'll find structures, we'll find evidence of villages, but written history, you don't find recorded language older, very little in terms of recorded. That's just pictures. You don't find scriptures, you find pictures. So it actually fits, because historians don't find written history before 4,500 years.
Do they have archaeology that's saying that it's actually older than 4,000 years?
Yeah, so archaeologists can find things that are older all over the world, like including the pyramids, including Stonehenge and things like that. So you can argue that those were also put there, or that they're remnants of past civilizations from like previous Shmitot, which is a popular theory, that the pyramids are way older than we think, like tens of thousands of years old, that the Egyptians didn't build the pyramids. They found them. They built around them, essentially. So that's the link. Then we have to ask the next question, which is, okay, so why? So there's seen that where the Torah was given. We still haven't really gotten to the core of the problem here. Why there? Why that connection of China and Sin? And that helps to explain why our calendar is so similar, our divine calendar, because we have that in common. But we have to keep going further, because there's a fascinating debate that's going to bring things together again. And it's found in the Kuzari, written by Rabbi Yehuda Halevi, famous Sephardic rabbi in Spain about 1,000 years ago. And what is the Kuzari? It's basically, we know that before that, these people called the Khazars, which we mentioned earlier, the Khazars were this Turkic people in the Caucasus region, the Crimea, the Caucasus. And the Khazar king at the time, they were a very powerful kingdom at the time, one of the most powerful, and their king named Bulan decided to convert to Judaism. So he wanted a new religion for his growing empire, and paganism wasn't working, and he was looking to the Christian Europe to the west and the Muslims to the south, and he said, we need something like this, so a binding monotheistic religion to bring us together. And according to the legend, he invited an imam and a priest and a rabbi and said, okay, sell me your religion, I'm going to pick one. And according to the legend, the Jew won, of course. So King Bulan converted the whole kingdom to Judaism. Or at least he himself converted. There's different versions. And we have historical evidence to support this. Either the royal family converted. That's probably what happened, that the royal family converted and the nobility. Most of the people still retained their paganism. Maybe some of the people converted. We know that many Jews were fleeing from Christian and Muslim persecution and went to Khazaria. And that's one of the reasons why the royal family converted as well. They had many Jewish people come into their country. Archaeologists find Khazar coins all over. They found them in England, they found them in China, and they're very similar to Arabic coins, except instead of saying there's no God but Allah and Muhammad is his prophet, it says there's no God but Hashem and Moses is his prophet. Like they minted them very similarly to the way that the Muslims minted their coins. And such coins, well, the Khazarians minted it similar to the Muslim coins, but just changed Muhammad to, they came after. And you find such coins across the old world. So they were a very powerful empire, and archaeologists find evidence of Jewish Khazaria all over the place. And so Yehuda Halevi, Rabbi Yehuda, wrote this text called the Kuzari. It's a fictional account of what that debate would have looked like, where the rabbi and the king are discussing Judaism, and the king is like being convinced to convert to Judaism, basically. So he wrote a fictional account, which is really trying to it's a defense of Judaism in a way, and it's like a commentary on all kinds of things in Judaism, and it's structured in a way where the king of the Khazarians, who's called the Kuzari, is asking questions of the rabbi and commenting on what the rabbi is saying and challenging his points. So that's the book. So in the second essay, when the rabbi in the story is describing to the king, telling him about Shabbat and about creation, and creation began in Israel. We know that Israel the Tanakh calls Israel Tabur Haaretz, the navel of the world, the belly button of the world. It's the center of the world. And we say that Israel is like the center of creation. Like, where did the Big Bang begin from? Where did that singularity in creation start? Israel, right? Israel is the point of creation. Everything began there. It's the center of the universe. That's one of the reasons why it's the Holy Land. It's like a stargate to the heavens. That's Israel. So the rabbi is explaining this, that creation began with Israel. Everything happened first in Israel and then everywhere else in the world. Which means also Shabbat happened first in Israel. When God rested on the seventh day. The first Shabbat, sunset, sunrise, that whole thing, the first Shabbat was in Israel. So what does the Kuzari say to that? And what's the problem with that? So the rabbi is telling him...
Yeah, exactly. Anybody that's east of there...
Good. So Amar HaKuzari, Alot Chilat Kviyot HaYamim Minatzin. But the day starts in China. That's impossible. Right? How can the Jews have Shabbat first if China is to the east? It's the land of the rising sun, Japan and China. So the Japanese had Shabbat before the Jews. Right? So how can it be that Shabbat started in Israel first? That's what he's asking. It must have happened in China first. So who kept Shabbat first? The Jews or the Chinese? That's what the Kuzari is saying. So another connection between our calendars. True, that's true, exactly. So that's actually what Rabbi Yehuda, well, actually no, the rabbi in his book is saying. So Amar Chaver, he's saying really, Halo atchalat Shabbat eina ki'im miSinai, that Shabbat really began in Sinai. There's a kind of a play on words here, because he's saying, hey, it began over there in Sinai. He's saying, no, it began in Sinai. When the Jewish people became the Jewish people, that's when they really started to keep Shabbat on Mount Sinai. And then he goes on to explain what happens. He says, he actually shows his knowledge of the world is very precise. Because what he's saying China is 6 hours to the east of Israel and 18 hours to the west of Israel. So if you go west, China's 18 hours west, which means it's 6 hours east of Israel, which is amazing because today that's exactly true. Beijing is exactly 6 hours ahead of Israel time. If you look at Beijing time versus Israel time, it's exactly 6 hours ahead. So Rabbi Yehuda Halevi is already telling you 1,000 years ago, China is 6 hours ahead of Israel. Okay? And 18 hours if you go westward, 6 hours if you go eastward. So, see, they knew, they were a lot more knowledgeable than we think. Right? Their astronomy was a lot more advanced than we think.
It's a convention. Change of time. It's a convention. The line
Hours, you're saying the actual concept of the hours.
change of the actual line of the change of time.
The international date line.
International date time.
Exactly. Yeah. That's what I'm getting at. So what he's saying actually is the rabbi first says Israel kept Shabbat first. Okay. And then 18 hours later, China kept Shabbat. So China was a day behind. China wasn't 6 hours ahead, but 18 hours behind. So everything started in Israel. Shabbat started in Israel. And then 18 hours later, which is actually the next day, from our perspective, we think of it as being the next day for China. So it's like they kept Shabbat the next day already. But Shabbat started in Israel first. Now, we don't follow that because today we say that, no, China is ahead of Israel. Like if Jews live in China or in Australia, they bring in Shabbat before Israel. So Rabbi Yehuda Halevi first brings an approach saying, no, Shabbat, the original Shabbat happened in China the next day. Well, there would have been 1 day behind. But we don't follow that halachically. And then if you keep reading, we're not going to go through the whole thing. He does seem to also give the possibility of the other way, that basically, if you go back to creation, you can read it like this. That Shabbat started in Israel. China was 6 hours ahead. So what happened in China? While it was Saturday in China, it wasn't Shabbat in China. Because Shabbat was invented in Israel. And then next week, China had its first Shabbat. And for Israel, it was the second Shabbat already. Okay. So meaning Israel had one more Shabbat than China. So you can interpret it also like that. That basically Israel had Shabbat first. And then China had Shabbat the following week. They did indeed bring it in 6 hours earlier. But it was already the second Shabbat in Israel. Okay, so that maintains that Shabbat came first in Israel. Okay, that's the discussion. And he actually says it's all relative to Adam, because Adam himself was created in Israel, and time really only starts with Adam. So, good. Meaning when Adam, and this is really interesting, because Adam was created on the sixth day for us. But in China, it would have already been, they're 6 hours ahead. So, potentially, depending on what time of day Adam was created, and we know we have different ideas as when he was created, but it was potentially already Shabbat in China, which couldn't have been Shabbat in China, but this is where it gets really cool. This is really amazing. Because if it was the sixth day for us, it may have already been the seventh day in China. So to them, it would have seemed like Adam was made on the seventh day. And you know what's really amazing about this? So Chinese New Year, guess what? The seventh day of the festival is called the birth of mankind. So the seventh day of Chinese New Year is the day that they consider the birth of mankind, which is actually fits perfectly with this. Because what would have been the seventh day in China was still the sixth day in Israel. Isn't that cool? So they have the birth of mankind on the seventh day. So that's actually consistent, because it would have been the sixth day in Israel. Perfect. And actually, since we mentioned Confucius actually has a saying that in his Book of Changes, this rule goes and returns every 7 days it comes again. So some people see that as, in Confucius, a reference to Shabbat, that life cycles itself every 7 days, that there's a 7-day week, even according to Confucius. And there were times in Chinese history where they kept a 7-day week. The Tang Dynasty had that all the way back in the 8th century.
What else was there besides that?
No, because most of the world didn't keep... The whole idea of a 7-day week is a Jewish idea.
Right.
And Christians got it from us, and Muslims got it from us, and spread it. But different cultures, like the Romans had an 8-day week at one point, a 10-day week. In Mesoamerica, they had like a 13-day week at one point. Like, that could be anything, right? Because it's not based on anything astronomical. So the world keeps 7 days today because the Torah says so. That's all. So sometimes we forget that. But it's a Torah idea that we have 7 days. So the Tang dynasty in the 8th century had sacrifices on every 7th day, and there's a monument in Chang'an, and it says there that on the 7th day we offer sacrifices after having purified our hearts and received absolution from our sins. So their 7th day for them was a day of like atonement, sacrifices, prayers, purifying their hearts. Very interesting. What's that? Yeah, good, exactly. Very good. So we were saying the current year in China right now is 4722. 4722. So if you work that out, because the Jewish year is 5784, that means that the Chinese calendar started in 1062 of the Jewish calendar. So our calendar is 1062 years ahead, which is actually right at the time when Noach was born. Noach was born in 1056. So it's interesting. It seems like they're counting from Noach, as they should, because they're Bnei Noach, technically, because all of mankind today are the children of Noach. So their earliest possible ancestor would have been Noach. Okay, so I really wanted to get to the Zodiac and to the animals, and it's like we didn't even start, which is crazy. So I guess we're going to need to do part 3. I don't know. Okay, but let's get to the Zodiac. So the idea is that there's something really deeply spiritual and ancient connecting the westernmost people of Asia and the easternmost people of Asia. And it connects to Sinai, to Sin, Midbar Sin, and so much of our calendars and our chronology is the same, which is really amazing. And so there's definitely something there. This is a divine connection. This is not a coincidence, all these things. So what can we learn from the Chinese zodiac, which has so much significance for the Chinese? What can we learn from that for us? So we talked about the year of the dragon, which is this year. We talked about the significance of that last time. We talked about the year of the snake and the significance of that last time. And it's interesting if you look at the snake. Next year will be the year of the snake. This year is the year of the dragon. Next year will be the year of the snake. And to connect to what we were saying, we did a class in December, Will Moshiach come this year? We proposed there, based on the Zohar, there's a prophecy of the Zohar that on the 25th of Elul, on a Friday, a new star will appear, the star of Jacob, and that's a sign that Moshiach will come. And we said that this year, on the 27th of September, scientists, astronomers are predicting that a comet will appear in the sky. And you will be able to see it with the naked eye. And this comet is coming to us now, and it will appear on September 27th, which is a Friday, and it's going to be Elul 25th in the evening. So that's an amazing correspondence that I don't know how often it happened in history, maybe never. So it's a potential sign, because we are expecting a new star on the 27th of September, which is a Friday, and it's going to be Elul 25th, which is what the Zohar says. And then the Zohar says 70 days later, there's going to be some event in Israel, some tremor, perhaps an earthquake, some fire. And then after that, at some point, Mashiach will emerge. So if we were to follow that timeline, we're looking at Mashiach sometime next year, like at the start of 2025, which is when, hopefully, again, we're saying in potential, this could be completely wrong, but next year, 2025, at the same time, we're going to have in January, Chinese New Year, and the year of the snake. And we said how the snake is a symbol of Mashiach. And we said that Nachash Gimatria 358 is Mashiach. And Mashiach is described as the one wielding the snake staff, like Moshe. Like Moshe had a staff that turned into a snake. So there is this symbolism of Mashiach as the one that's symbolized by a snake. And next year is the year of the snake. And it fits with the pattern, that the timeline given in the Zohar. And we also mentioned then something amazing. In Parashat Miketz in the Torah, Miketz means from the end, right? Ketz means Ketz Hayamim, the end of days. And every parsha in the Torah, at the end, there's a little mnemonic that tells you how many verses are in the parsha. Right? You've probably seen this in a Chumash. At the end of each parsha, it says this parsha has this many verses. This parsha has this many verses. Strangely, in Parashat Miketz, it's the only parsha where it doesn't just say the verses, but it also says how many words there are. Why? Like, it's weird. The only parsha out of 54 that it also says the words. And how many words are there in Parashat Miketz? 2025 words. and it's Parashat Miketz. It's Ketz Yamin, end of days. So that parsha has Dafka, it says 2,025 words. So maybe that's another sign. And it happens to be the year of the snake, which is a significant year for many reasons. Because if you'll notice, going back to some previous years of the snake, 9/11, September 2001, which gave us the world we have today, the war on terror, all that was a year of the snake, 2001. Go back another 12 years before that, 1989 was a year of the snake. What happened in 1989? Soviet Union collapsed, completely changed the world, but not only that. 1989 is the beginning of China, Tiananmen Square. 1989 was the Tiananmen Square protest, which led China to open up. A few years later, they joined the World Trade Organization. So it's after 1989, because of the Tiananmen Square protests, that they start opening up their economy. They join the capitalist world. Everybody thought that's it. It's over. China's not going to be communist anymore. Capitalism will win. Clearly, we were wrong. They just took capitalism and integrated it with their dictatorship and now dominate the whole world. But it seemed like in 1989 that there would be this rapprochement. China started to make these reforms and join the world economy. And now we know what's happened 30 years later. So 89 is also very significant for China as the beginning of China's ascent in the world. So you see the year of the snake actually has a lot of significance even in the past. And we talked about 1989 also as the birth of the internet. Also. But also the internet. The World Wide Web started in 1989, and artificial intelligence and all that stuff. So there's so much happened that year. The first GPS satellite, so many things, the Human Genome Project. It's just very interesting how this happens. And we said that that's the year that was anyways prophesied to be the start of Ikvot Moshiach, because that was 5750 on the Jewish calendar. It's Erev Shabbat on the Jewish calendar. So we talked about that before, so you can review that. Okay, so that's the year of the snake. So we have the year of the dragon, we have the year of the snake, then we have the year of the horse. So we said that's 2026. We said the horse is symbolic of war on the one hand, that our sages say sus, a horse, is sas lekrav, that they're happy to run and they'll even run into war. The horse was the original cavalry, the original tank, and horses like to, they are symbolic of war, but also a horse is a symbol of joy and of liberty, like that symbol of the Mustang, the stallion running wild through the plains. A horse is also a symbol of liberty, of freedom, and joy. Because again, sas, our sages say the sus has a connection to the word sas. And sas is sason, is happiness. And the Ramchal has a very interesting thing about sason. We don't have time to go into it, but the Ramchal has a whole exposition on the word sason and what it represents, and it has very messianic overtones. He actually says that sason, there's simcha and there's sason. He says sason is like a joy of redemption. Like we sing at the wedding, kol sason ve kol simcha, and kol sason is from the prophecy in Jeremiah where he describes the end of days, where the bride and the groom will rejoice in Jerusalem, in a rebuilt Jerusalem. So we say it on all the weddings, but actually it's a prophecy from Yirmiyahu about the end of days, when we will return to Israel and the bride and the groom and everybody will come together and be happy in Jerusalem. So the Ramchal has a very interesting meditation on the word sason, and that sason is in his Ma'amar HaGeula, the discourse on the redemption, and he says that sason is redemption joy, right? So there is that connection as well. So I'm going to go through this quickly because I don't want to do part 3. You guys have energy for another 15 minutes? Yeah? Okay, we'll finish it now. Then we have the next year after the horse is the year of the sheep. Sheep, Rachel. Rachel means a sheep. You know that? Yeah? In the Torah, Rachel is it's sheep. It's a flock of sheep. And Leah, you know what Leah means? Everybody knows Rachel because Rachel is clearly used in the Torah as sheep. But Leah is not. It's only used as a name. It's not used as a noun for something else. So Leah, based on the ancient languages, if you connect it to the ancient Aramaic and Akkadian, Leah means cow, means cattle. So Rachel and Leah, there's a theme there of sheep and cattle. So that's also like the ox on these Chinese zodiac. And we know Rachel is symbolic of, on the one hand, of a sheep, but Rachel is also, in Judaism, symbolic of the mother that went out with her children into exile. Right? Like Yirmiyahu says, chapter 31, Ko amar Hashem, kol berama nishma, Rachel mevaka al banea. That Rachel is crying for her children who are in exile, who are suffering from all the persecution and all the anti-Semitism and all the nonsense. So Rachel goes with the Jewish people into exile and she's crying with them. And she is not being comforted. And God tells her, Ko amar Hashem, what does he tell her? Min'i kolech mi bechi, right? Stop crying. Don't worry. Ve'enaich midima, wipe your eyes, wipe the tears away from your eyes, because everything will be fine. Ki yesh sachar lefeulatech, and you will get your reward. God says, Na'um Hashem, ve'shavu me'eretz oyev, and everybody will come back from the lands of the enemies. Ve'yesh tikva le'acharitech, and you have hope for your future. Na'um Hashem, ve'shavu banim ligvulam. And all the sons, all the children will return to their borders, right? So Rachel, that passage is really important throughout Jewish texts because Rachel is always described as the mother who went with us into exile and she's crying with us. And God says, stop crying. Everybody will be back home. Don't worry. Everything will be fine. So there is that symbolic representation of Rachel as we can connect it to, hopefully, the year of the sheep. If we're going to go through this cycle, if we're expecting the snake, the horse, which is war, and then liberty, and then the sheep, everybody can return back home. Shuvu banim ligvulam. Right? So everybody's coming back to their borders. It's interesting also the word keves, which is a sheep. Another word for sheep. The more common word for sheep is keves. And the same word keves also has another meaning. When you pronounce it kevish. What's a kevish? A ramp to the temple, right? In the altar, the ramp to the altar was called a kevish. So our sages discuss the proper construction of the kevish to the altar. So there's a symbol there. It's an interesting play on words. That the sheep that were led to the slaughter, and you have up the ramp to the altar, there's the keves, which is the sheep, and the kevish, which is the ramp that was leading them up. Anyway, it's symbolic of the temple. So hopefully that's a sign of the forthcoming third temple. Then we have the year of the monkey. What is symbolic about the monkey? In Judaism, the monkey is also very significant. Why is the monkey really significant? Something really amazing. First of all, our sages say that you have to say a special bracha when you see a monkey. If you go to the zoo, you have to say a bracha. The Gemara says in Masechet Brachot, Tanu Rabbanan, haroeh pil. If you see an elephant, kof, a monkey, or a kifof, which is either a vulture or maybe an owl, Omer, you say a bracha, Baruch atah Hashem Eloheinu melech haolam, meshaneh et habriot. Meshaneh et habriot, who makes amazing creatures. He has a diversity of amazing things. That God created a diversity, a variety of creatures, right? That he changes, meaning he's made a variety of creatures. Meshaneh et habriot. Biodiversity, all the magic of biodiversity. The pshat here is that these are all very wise. The elephant is very wise. It has the biggest brain, right, of most of the land mammals. And the monkeys are very wise. And the kifof, which is either a vulture or an owl, they're also very wise. Owls are a symbol of wisdom as well. Exactly. So then you say something about they're such amazing creatures. So we gave a class on this before. I'm not going to talk about it now. But the monkeys are special. Elephants as well, I mentioned earlier, according to some zodiacs, in different parts of East Asia, instead of the year of the pig, they have the year of the elephant. So it's also symbolic. And why is the monkey so special? The Arizal says, Ki bein kol madrega u madrega. You know how we categorize all living things, or all things that God created, into 4 categories. Domem is the inanimate, Tzomeach is the plant life, Baalei Chaim, Chai is the animals, and Medaber is humans, like us, right? We're the only ones that are Medaber, and then there's Domem, Tzomeach, Chai, Medaber. Inanimate, plant life, animal life, human life. And then the Arizal says something amazing. Bein kol madrega u madrega, between each of those levels, there is yesh b'chinat emtza'i. There are things in between. There are transitions in the fossil record, evolutionary things that connect the 2 categories. What does he say? Kmo adoni hasadeh. Adoni hasadeh is a special plant. It's a mysterious term what adoni hasadeh means. But the Arizal says adoni hasadeh is chaya shehu bein hatzomeach va'baalei chaim. Adonia Sadeh is a Venus flytrap. It's a carnivorous plant. You know, there are plants that eat. There are plants that can trap. Sometimes they eat whole mice and frogs, and there are pitcher plants, and there are sundews, and there are Venus flytraps. There are many hundreds of species of carnivorous plants that eat meat. So he's saying, what are those? Are they a plant or an animal? So he says they're in between, right? They're a transition from plant to animal. And he says, vasfog, sponges. Sponges are the simplest animals, right? It's called porifera in the scientific language. Asfog emtzai ben hadomem v'atzomech. And also, v'chen ha'almogim, anikraim koral. Corals. What are corals? They look like rocks, but they're alive. Corals are alive, but they look like rocks. So sponges and corals are the transition from rocks to plants. So they're similar to plants, right? Like natural sponges, right? The sponges that grow in the ocean. A natural sponge and the corals, they look like rocks. They look like inanimate, but they're actually alive. So that's between inanimate and living. And then, what's between the animals and the humans? Ve'hakof ha'emtzai ben ha'balei chaim le'adam. And a monkey is a transition from animals to humans. This is before Darwin. The Arizal lived 300 years before Darwin. He's saying the same thing. I wonder why they didn't cancel the Arizal. They only canceled Darwin. But I'm playing. I know, I'm playing. I'm kidding. I'm obviously joking. But I'm not joking also, because the Arizal is saying that monkeys are not quite animals and not quite humans. They are an evolutionary step in between. Right? They are somehow in between.
But is he saying it's an evolutionary
No, obviously not. Obviously not. But the language is very similar to like a biologist's language, right? So he's saying that God made them this way. So, yeah.
Didn't they cut the monkeys at the time of Babel?
That's one midrash. It doesn't mean that they came from that. It means that the people were turned into monkeys.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean that there weren't monkeys before. It just means that they were turned into more monkeys, maybe.
More monkeys.
Yeah.
Different kind of monkeys.
Right. Different species of monkeys. So the monkey represents in Judaism something that's almost human, but not human. Something that's just very immoral, debauched, likes to just play games, likes to just have lots of intercourse and things like that. So a monkey is like an unrefined human, right? Like a debauched, immoral human that's lazy, that doesn't like to work. That's the kuf. Right, and the letter kuf means a monkey, and it's the only letter that goes down. Right, lamed is the only letter that goes up, and kuf is the only letter that goes down. It's something that descends into the klipa, into like impurity. Right, so it's interesting. The word Amalek, right, the enemy, the arch nemesis of the Jews is Amalek. Amalek is amal, kuf. Right, amal means labor, like working hard for what? Like a kuf, like a monkey. Like working for just physical pleasure, like no spiritual pursuit, like nothing high, no higher purpose, living like a monkey, just for like food and pleasure, and that's it. That's the work of Amalek, is to convince people to live a simply materialistic, secular, hedonistic life. Just work hard so that you can afford physical pleasures, and that's it. Right? And Israel's the other way. Israel is Yashar El. Right, you start with a yud and you end with a lamed. Lamed is the only one that goes up to God. Right? Lamed goes above the line. And lamed is also actually in the shape of a snake, if you noticed, going up to heaven to connect to what we said last time. The lamed is like a snake going up. So that's a difference between Israel, which starts with a divine yud that's floating up in the air and going up to God to a lamed, and Amalek, which starts with an ayn. Ayn means the eye. It's all very physical. It's all very materialistic. You know, you see it, you want it. Right? That's Amalek, and ends with the kuf. So it's a transition from a monkey world, like the world we live in today. We live in a world of monkeys. We live in a world where everything the propaganda is all just do whatever you want, be whatever you want, have intercourse with whoever you want, like eat anytime, instant gratification, no spirituality. Our world right now is a world of the kuf, of the monkey, and we need to transition from baalei chaim, from kof to a medaber. So there is that symbolic aspect of the monkey as well. Then we have the year of the rooster, which would be like 2029 going forward, and the rooster, interestingly enough, is also a symbol of the redemption. In the Zohar and in Perek Shirah, the rooster is the animal that calls for Geula. that says Mashiach is coming, get ready. Perek Shira has more verses for the rooster than any other animal. Remember, Perek Shira is a book that has all the animals and what all the animals sing to God. And Perek Shira devotes 8 verses to the rooster. 8, more than anything else. Right? The rooster has 7 calls plus an introductory statement. And it's always calling people to wake up, stop sleeping, get ready. Mashiach is coming. God is watching you. Do more mitzvot. Stop being, a monkey. That's the rooster, right? The rooster is always waking people up. And the 4th call of the rooster, guess what the 4th call of the rooster is? Li'yeshuatcha kiviti Hashem. What Yaakov told Dan, right? That blessing that he gave, the blessing of the snake, the blessing of Mashiach, that's the 4th call of the rooster. So get ready for the end of days. The salvation is near. That's the rooster. Right? The Zohar says this, and Perek Shira says this. And so that's the rooster. We have the year of the rat. Interestingly enough, if you look at the year of the rat, which is the first year of the cycle, the last year of the rat was 2020. Think about what that means in terms of what rats represent. The rat represents disease, right? The rat is the carrier of disease all over the world. And the Gemara actually says in Bava Kama that, other than the fact that rats represent disease, there is, remember when we talked about the solar eclipse, we said that there's 4 reasons why an eclipse happens. And one of them was a strange thing, that eclipses happen because people are growing, megadle be'emad daka be'eretz Yisrael, that people grow seemingly pets or small animals in Israel. What does that mean? We mentioned that, but we didn't explain it. And a lot of people on YouTube were commenting, what does that mean? Am I a sinner if I have a pet? Am I not allowed to have a pet in Israel? It was really strange. So Bava Kama actually explains what this means. And the Mishnah in Bava Kama says, Ein megadlin be'emad daka be'eretz Yisrael, aval magdilin beSuria. You're allowed to raise these animals outside of Israel. Uba midbarot shebe'eretz Yisrael. And in the wilderness of Israel, in big spaces. Not in inhabited areas, not in villages. You don't want to raise these animals in populated areas, but you can raise them if you have a big backyard. That's a different story. And then it says, Ein megadlin tarnagolim beYerushalayim mikpnei hakdoshim. You weren't allowed back then to raise chickens in Jerusalem. Why can't you have chickens in Jerusalem? Because Jerusalem was a holy city. There were Kohanim everywhere. You can't have anything dead and impure. And chickens, they're like scavengers. They eat everything. They take bones from one place, throw it in another place. They pick garbage. So they didn't allow raising chickens in Jerusalem because they would spread impure stuff all over the city. And perhaps bones and things like that they dig up. So you couldn't have chickens there. And then, Ein megadlin chazirim bekol makom. A Jew is not allowed to raise pigs anywhere. That's kind of self-explanatory. Lo yigadel adam et hakelev. A person should not raise a dog, ela im kan haya kashur beshalshelet, unless it's chained. Okay, if the dog is chained, you can have a dog, but you can't raise dogs free because, again, they could be dangerous, they scare people, they bite. Ein porsin nishbin leonim. You're not allowed to also trap pigeons in an inhabited area because it might be somebody's pet bird. So you're not allowed to actually set traps for pigeons. Ela im kan haya rachok min hayishuv. So it has to be far from an inhabited area if you want to trap pigeons. And then the Gemara explains, Ein megadlin be'emad daka be'eretz Yisrael, aval megadlin b'midbar shebeYehuda. You're allowed to raise them in the wilderness of Yehuda, uvamidbar she'bisfar Akko, and in various open spaces. Ve'af al pi she'amru ein megadlin be'emad daka, even though our sages taught that you're not allowed to raise small animals and pets and things like that in inhabited areas, but aval megadlin be'emad gasa, you're allowed to raise big animals. You're allowed to have cows and things like that. Lefi she'en gozrin gzara latzibur, ela im ken rov tzibur yacholim la'amod ba. They won't make a decree that people can't fulfill. So not having cows next to your house is too difficult. People need the milk and whatever, all the positive things that come out of it. So you need to have the cow. Sheep and goats you don't want to have, and small pets you don't want to have in inhabited areas. And then it says, Kshem shamru en megadlin be'emad daka, כך אמרו אין מגדלין חיה דקה. So in the same way that you're not allowed to raise sheep and goats and domesticated animals, you can't raise other animals, small animals. And Rabbi Ishmael omer, megadlin klavim kofrin, you're allowed to raise little dogs, that's fine. Vechatulim, and you're allowed to have cats. Vekofin, and monkeys. Vechuldot, snaim, and you're allowed to have little rodents, various rodents. Why? Mipnei hamsters, gerbils, whatever. Because they clean the house. They eat little mice and they fight off rats. The cats eat the rats and they get rid of the disease. So we know that the Black Death, the plague in Europe, was brought from the Far East to Europe, and rats helped to spread it. And one of the reasons why it's spread in Europe, they say, is because European superstition, they killed all the cats. And then there was too many rats. And then there were rats everywhere, so the rats spread the disease even more, because there weren't enough cats to keep the population of rats down. So Rashi actually says, "Lenakeret habayit mina achbarim," because they clean the house from mice and rats and things like that. So it's interesting that 2020 was the year of the rat, and that's precisely when COVID hit. So I don't think it's a coincidence that a Chinese virus from China happened right in the Chinese year of the rat. Right? So just think about that. What are the odds of a pestilence in the same year as the year of the rat? And last year, the pandemic was declared over, was the year of the rabbit, which in the other type of Chinese zodiac, in other places like the Vietnamese zodiac, it's the year of the cat. Because there's another legend that when the rat jumped onto the ox, the cat also jumped onto the ox. But then the rat pushed the cat off. And then the cat caught up and came in fourth. So there is, in some versions of the zodiac, it's actually a cat. And it's interesting that the cat is the one that's eating the rat. I feel like I'm singing Chad Gadya. But so the cat eats the rat, and then the pandemic is over. So interestingly enough. All right. 2020 was the year of the rat. That's the first year. The current cycle of 12 began in 2020. So that's also very symbolic, right? That event transformed the world. That's the time when the elites decided to put in their Great Reset, which they're not hiding. They talk about, it's not a conspiracy theory, they talk about it openly. The Great Reset began in 2020 with all of that comes with that, this new era, and that they're shoving down our throats. So that was the year of the rat in 2020. 2021 was the year of the ox, the friendly and passive ox that got tricked by the rat, just like we were all duped into this whole thing in 2021. And then 2022 is the year of the tiger fighting back to get some of his rights, fighting against oppression. And 2023, like we said, was the rabbit or the cat that cleans up the infestation. As the Gemara says, that these kinds of pets are good to have because they eat up the little plague spreaders. And now we're in the year of the dragon, and we spoke about the meaning of that with Leviathan. And next year is the year of the snake, and we spoke about that. And 2026 is symbolic of the horse, is the war, but then the liberty and the sason. And 2027 is the sheep, which is Rachel, literally in the Torah language, and Rachel coming back from exile with her children. And 2028 is the monkey, which is transitioning towards real humanity, right? Real moral humans, and from a world that's a monkey world to a world that's a real human world, like God intended. And 2029 is the year of the rooster, announcing finally the redemption is good, we're here. And then we have the year of the dog, and we spoke about dogs in terms of the power of the smell and the return to the sense of smell. So listen to that class on the secrets of Purim. And remember, our sages say that the dog is kulolev. Kelev, why is it called a kelev? Kulolev, because a dog is all heart. It's very loyal, it's very friendly, it loves its owner unconditionally. So there are positives to the dog, and hopefully that's the symbolic of the world we will have then, where everybody actually is finally friendly with each other and loyal to each other, and no more of the divisions and the fighting and all that. And finally, we have the year of the pig, and we'll end with this. Or the year of the elephant in some versions, which is interesting because the Gemara in Masechet Brachot, when it talks about dream interpretation, aroet pil b'chalom, if you dream about an elephant, what does that mean? Plaot na'asulo, that you will see wonders. And pilim, if you dream about many elephants, even better. Pil'ei plaot na'asulo. You will see many miracles. So the elephant comes from the word pele. So if you see an elephant, it's good. It's a good sign. It's a sign of miracles. So hopefully that year, the year of the pig, which will be 2031, will be a year of miracles. I mean, we'll see miracles before then. But that'll be pele plaot, right? Like pli'ei plaot, many miracles. And if it's not the elephant and it's a pig, it's still significant. Why is it significant? Our sages say, why is a pig called a chazir? They say, Lema nikra shmo chazir, she'atid HaKadosh Baruch Hu lehachziro leYisrael. That one day he'll come back. The pig will become kosher one day. Right? He'll come back to us. What does that mean? The pig will become kosher? Anybody here want to eat a pig? I don't think so. What does this mean? That the pig is a chazir because one day he will be yachzor, he will come back to the Jewish people. What does this mean? So you can interpret that as the pig is seen as a symbol of Esav, and there will finally be peace between Yaakov and Esav. That's definitely one interpretation. There are many interpretations. You can take it on a very scientific, practical, economic way, and I've written about this before, that today everybody's pushing this whole new synthetic meat, lab-grown meat. And what's interesting is lab-grown meat is technically going to be kosher. Some of them have already gotten Echsher's kashrut certification. So lab-grown meat is an interesting possibility because is lab-grown pork kosher? Because it was taken from a pig, like stem cells from a pig, and then you culture those stem cells. And it's just cells. It's never been an animal. It's just cell, like you grow it in a lab into the shape of a steak, and it's just cells. But it was never like an animal. You didn't have to shecht it. Didn't have a soul. It's just cells. So would that be kosher? Yeah, it's not kosher because it's taken from an actual live animal. But let's say you have stem cells that are taken from the animal, but the stem cell itself is not a food. The milk is a food that's ready coming from the animal. This is like you're taking a chemical, essentially, a compound from the thing, and then you're culturing it, you're adding things in a lab, and then you're turning it into something else. And the same stem cells could be cultured for decades. Right? Like we can use, scientists today use the cells from Henrietta Lacks. If you know about Henrietta Lacks, was a woman in the 1950s, and scientists took some of her cancer cells, and they've been culturing them ever since, for decades, and they're still using them and experimenting on them. So you could take stem cells from a pig, and 70 years later, you could still be culturing those same stem cells. So it's not the same pig anymore. It's been mitosing and dividing so many times that there's no relation to the original pig. So that's a halachic issue that's still being debated. Would that be kosher? So it's possible that synthetic pork might be kosher. I don't know if anybody would want to eat it, but I think it's more like
you'll be paying $5 a kilo.
Right.
$80 a kilo.
Right. It has positives. It can help in terms of you don't have to raise animals, you don't have to feed animals. There's less pollutions. You don't have to kill animals. Right. It's a topic that we need to devote, I think, a whole lesson to. As we move into the Messianic age, how will our diets change? Are you going to be able to eat a cheeseburger with cultured beef? It's not a real cow. It was taken from stem cells from a cow, and then they turned it into ground beef in a lab. So can you, with synthetic cheese and everything is synthetic. So, but I think very simply, we can look at it as, what does that mean that the pig will come back? I think it means that not come back in the sense that Jews will eat it, because I think that's very unpalatable for anybody. I don't think any of us actually want to eat that. I think what it means is more like the pig, which is a symbol of tum'ah and impurity and something dirty that likes to wallow in its filth, that whole idea, that energy, that pig-like mentality will disappear, and there will no longer be tum'ah in the world, that the whole world will be elevated to a world of kedusha. That's what I think it's really signifying. So hopefully by 2031, hopefully before that, hopefully much sooner than that, we have a world that's entirely holy and no more impurity. And so just to sum everything up, we see clear, very significant parallels between Israel and China. Our calendar is the same, amazingly, and we have so much in common. And this whole ancient discussion about who kept Shabbat first, and the whole idea of Sin, that we got the Torah in Midbar Sin, and they are Sin, and there's this very ancient connection linking us together. So there's a lot more to this than meets the eye. And just to finish with the Zohar that we once quoted, that there is a Zohar that says in the end of days there will be a nation that comes from the far end of the world and that will participate in the final war of Gog and Magog to bring about, the redemption. So maybe that's one of these, maybe that's China, who knows? Maybe it's a nation that's going to come from the Far East and play a very significant role as China is already playing. So time will tell, but that's just something to think about. So we'll end with that.